This was supposed to be our day. But she decided to steal it. She got up on a chair and announced her pregnancy. And then her husband said, "Let's find the real father first." My name is Lily, I'm 25 years old, and I'm engaged to Jason, the kind of person who makes everything feel a little softer, a little easier just by being around. We've been together for a few years now, long enough to have weathered a few storms and come out stronger, and when he proposed, it felt like the most natural next step in a life we were already building together. From the very beginning, his family welcomed me with open arms. Dinners filled with laughter, invitations to holidays, even small, thoughtful gifts just because. All except for one person. His younger sister, Candace. From the first time I met her, she looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in, not someone her brother loved. She never said anything outright, at least not in those early days, but the energy was unmistakable, tight smiles, curt answers, and an unmistakable chill whenever we were in the same room. At first, I thought maybe it was just nerves or jealousy over losing her brother's attention, but over time, it became clear that with Candace, it was never going to be that simple. Candace has always been the golden child in their family, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose report cards were framed, whose accomplishments were celebrated like national victories, and whose every word seemed to carry weight. She's a smart girl, I'll give her that, top of her class, the type who makes you feel like you're underachieving just by standing next to her, and she wears that quiet superiority like a crown. Her parents adore her, and not in the casual, healthy way most parents love their kids, but in the kind of way that feels performative, like they need the world to see how perfect their daughter is. Jason, by contrast, was always seen as the less accomplished sibling. He was passionate about things that didn't fit their mold: sports, art, chess, and while none of those are failures by any measure in his family's eyes, they never quite measured up to Candace's medals and academic accolades. He's brilliant in his own way, thoughtful and creative and driven, but in their household, his light was always a little dimmer in comparison. His parents never hid their favoritism. It was right there in the way they praised Candace at every opportunity, showered her with gifts after every semester, and threw elaborate parties for her birthdays and graduations like she was royalty. Meanwhile, Jason was often left standing in the shadows, reminded in subtle and not so subtle ways that he wasn't what they had hoped for. I still remember him telling me how, during one particularly harsh dinner, his father looked him dead in the eye and said, "At least we got one kid right." When it came time for college, Candace had a full support system. His parents helped her move in, covered her tuition, and visited her regularly. Jason, on the other hand, had to figure everything out on his own. He applied for financial aid, took out loans, and packed up his things alone. His parents didn't even offer to drive him to his dorm, let alone help him settle in. He told me he took a bus and carried 2 duffel bags across campus by himself, trying not to let it show how badly it hurt that no one cared enough to see him off. It was incredibly painful for me to hear these stories, to see the way Jason would pause before sharing them, like he still wasn't sure if it was okay to feel hurt by the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. But what hurt the most wasn't just the neglect from his parents, it was the way Candace herself treated him. She wasn't just cold or distant, she was cruel in that subtle, calculated way that cuts deeper because it comes from someone who knows exactly where your wounds are. She used to call him a loser, sometimes right to his face and sometimes under her breath with that mocking smile that made it clear she didn't respect him at all. According to Jason, there were times when she'd tell him outright that his only purpose was to make her life easier, that he was expected to sacrifice his needs, his dreams, even his peace, just so she could shine without interruption. And the sick part was no one in the family ever corrected her. They let it happen. They let her belittle him while they watched and stayed silent. I'm an architect by profession, working in urban planning with a focus on sustainable development, and when Jason finally decided to reconnect with his parents after years of strained silence, their reaction to me was startling. They were absolutely delighted, almost unnervingly so. Suddenly they were interested, attentive, full of warm smiles and polite questions, praising my work and background as if they had always been supportive of Jason's life choices. They liked that I came from an academic family, that my career was established, and that I carried myself with a kind of polish they clearly valued. For the first time, they treated Jason with something resembling pride, and even offered what sounded like an apology for how things had been in the past. But I couldn't help noticing how shallow it all felt, how their newfound interest in him only bloomed once he had someone by his side who met their standards, someone they could show off. It wasn't really about him. It was about how he looked with me standing next to him. But everything took a sharp turn the night Candace showed up unannounced at a family dinner we had been invited to, one that had actually felt, for the first time, pleasant, maybe even hopeful. At first, she was quiet, almost eerily so, sitting at the table with that familiar detached expression, sipping her wine and watching me with unreadable eyes. I tried to engage her gently, asked about her work and her interests, but she responded with clipped, one-word answers and tight smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Then, slowly her tone shifted. It started with a sarcastic comment about architecture, something like, "Oh, so you're one of those people who design things no one can afford." That stung, but I brushed it off. But she didn't stop there. She launched into a passive-aggressive tirade, saying I was part of the industry that kills trees for the sake of concrete and vanity, and then, in a low, pointed voice, added that people like me always think they're smarter than everyone else. It was the word arrogant that hung in the air like smoke, slow, bitter, and meant to be noticed. She didn't stop at snide remarks either. At some point during dessert, with this smug little smile, she pulled out her phone and showed an old photo she had apparently dug up from my Facebook, a picture of me with my ex-boyfriend taken years ago at a music festival. Without saying a word to me first, she sent it to the entire family group chat and then turned to me perfectly calm, and said I should probably take it down because it wasn't respectable for someone who was engaged. I felt my stomach drop, not from embarrassment but from the sheer pettiness of it, the calculated malice behind pretending to be concerned while publicly trying to humiliate me. Before I could even respond, Jason stepped in. He was furious and not just quietly angry but visibly shaken. He told her she was out of line, that going through someone's social media like that was invasive and spiteful, and that if she had any real respect for him, she'd stop trying to sabotage his relationship out of jealousy or whatever twisted motivation she was operating under. After that night, after Jason called her out in front of everyone, Candace made a dramatic show of deleting herself from the family group chat, claiming she needed space from the toxicity. But what was strange, almost obsessive, was that she continued to monitor me online. Even though she had unfollowed me on every platform, I could see her popping up in my story views, checking my posts almost daily like a ghost lurking just behind the curtain. She never liked anything, never commented, just watched. It was unsettling, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of reacting. Then, just as suddenly as she had reinserted herself into our lives, she vanished. No texts, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive holiday message. Months passed with complete silence until one day Jason's cousin casually mentioned that Candace had gotten married, secretly, in Vegas. None of us had known. No engagement announcement, no invitation, not even a word to her parents. She had just disappeared into a whole new life without so much as a goodbye. It eventually came to light, through whispers and second-hand accounts, that Candace's sudden marriage was to a man named Isaac, 13 years her senior and until recently a married man. The truth unraveled slowly, but what we learned was both unsurprising and deeply unsettling. Her relationship with Isaac hadn't been a whirlwind romance or a spontaneous decision in Vegas. It had been an affair, one that ultimately shattered another woman's marriage and tore apart a family that had no idea Candace was waiting in the wings. That was why she had hidden everything so carefully, why her parents hadn't known a thing, because even she understood how explosive the truth would be. She'd built her life on a carefully curated image of perfection, and this secret didn't fit into that narrative. So instead of owning it, she ran off to Vegas, tied the knot quietly, and hoped no one would connect the dots. Out of nowhere, Candace texted me one afternoon, a message that was oddly formal, filled with carefully chosen words apologizing for the way she had treated me, followed by an unexpected invitation to dinner at her place. I stared at the message for a long time, rereading it over and over, trying to decide whether it was genuine or another performance. Against my better judgment, I convinced Jason that we should go. I told myself that maybe marriage had grounded her, maybe the silence had given her space to reflect, and maybe, just maybe, she had changed. When we arrived at her house, it was clear from the moment we walked through the door that whatever version of Candace we were about to meet, humility was not part of the package. The place was ostentatiously luxurious, marble countertops, velvet chairs, a chandelier that seemed almost too large for the space, all of it carefully curated to dazzle. Candace floated through the house like a hostess in a magazine spread, beaming with pride as she gave us the full tour and bragged about her new life with Isaac, the vacations they were planning, the car he just bought her, the private chef they were considering hiring. It felt more like a sales pitch than a dinner invitation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her apology was less about remorse and more about repositioning herself in our lives on her own terms. For the first hour or so, it really did seem like Candace had turned over a new leaf. She smiled, she made small talk, and even complimented Jason on his latest chess tournament win with what almost sounded like sincerity. But as the evening wore on and the wine flowed a little too freely, her questions started to shift, edging past polite curiosity into something sharper, more invasive. She leaned in across the table with that all-too-familiar smirk and asked, "So, when's the big wedding? And how long until you start popping out kids?" I kept my tone calm and honest, told her plainly that Jason and I weren't planning on having children, that it was a mutual decision and one we felt completely at peace with. For a second, there was silence, just a beat of frozen air in the room, and then she exploded. Her voice rose so quickly and so loudly it startled me. She started yelling that I was unfit for marriage, that I was selfish, unnatural, that I was robbing Jason of his future and denying their parents' grandchildren. Her words poured out like venom, loud and unfiltered, and all the fake reconciliation from earlier crumbled in an instant. It was like she had just been waiting for a reason to attack again, and I had handed it to her on a silver platter. Jason stood up for me immediately, his voice steady but firm as he told Candace to stop, to sit down, and to never speak to me like that again. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a sharpness in his tone that made the whole room go still. For once, even Candace looked taken aback. Isaac, sitting awkwardly beside her, looked deeply uncomfortable and muttered an apology on her behalf, saying she had strong opinions, and that she didn't always know when to stop. But by then the damage was already done. Whatever flicker of hope I had held for reconciliation was gone. I left their house that night knowing with complete certainty that I wanted nothing more to do with her. The next morning, I blocked Candace on every platform. Messages, social media, everything. I didn't make a scene about it, didn't send her a final word or even tell Jason I'd done it right away. I just removed her from my life like a tumor I should have cut out a long time ago. A few weeks later, while out grabbing coffee with a colleague between meetings, I saw her, Candace, sitting in the corner of a quiet little cafe with a man who definitely wasn't Isaac. He was young, probably mid-20s, with a casual swagger that didn't match the polished, older businessman energy Isaac gave off. At first, I thought maybe it was just a friend, a client, someone from her social circle, but then I saw her reach across the table, laugh softly, and rest her hand on his knee. It wasn't just affectionate, it was intimate, familiar, the kind of touch you don't share with someone unless there's something more beneath it. I hesitated, then quietly took a photo on my phone, not because I wanted to start something but because I needed to know if what I was seeing was real. That night, I showed the photo to Jason, unsure of what his reaction would be. His face tightened immediately, and after a long silence, he told me that Candace had recently told the family she was pregnant, with Isaac's child. The pieces clicked into place so fast it made my head spin. She wasn't just lying to everyone, she was cheating on her husband, carrying his child, and pretending to be the picture of success and morality while tearing into everyone else for their choices. When Jason finally told Isaac what we had discovered, the man looked completely stunned, like the floor had opened up beneath him. He sat there in silence for a moment, then quietly admitted that he had been having doubts for weeks, that something hadn't felt right, but he hadn't wanted to believe it. After some heavy back and forth, he confirmed what Jason had feared, that the baby couldn't be his. The timeline didn't match and now everything made sickening sense. They agreed to wait until after our wedding to deal with it, to keep the peace at least until that one day was behind us. But Candace, in true Candace fashion, refused to give us even that. She showed up to our ceremony with a cold fire in her eyes and made a scene so loud, so chaotic, that it felt like time froze. Right in the middle of our vows, she stood up, clutched her stomach dramatically, and screamed that we were all liars, that I had destroyed her life, and that Jason was turning his back on his blood. Guests gasped, the officiant stopped mid-sentence, and for a moment, it was like every nightmare I'd ever had about that day had come to life. She stormed up to the stage like it was her own personal spotlight, ignoring the stunned stares and awkward silence hanging over the crowd, and with trembling hands and wild eyes, she attempted to hijack the microphone to announce her pregnancy in front of everyone. She shouted something about betrayal, about family, about truth, but the mic didn't work. I had foreseen this possibility, this exact kind of chaos, and I had asked the technician beforehand to keep the microphone off unless Jason or I were speaking. So there she stood, red-faced and fuming, trying to deliver a dramatic monologue to a room that could only hear fragments of her fury. And then, without a word of warning, Isaac stepped forward from the crowd. He walked calmly up to her, looked her straight in the eyes, and in a voice clear enough for everyone to hear, said, "I'm not the father of your child." The entire room went dead silent. Her face crumpled for a split second before she turned and fled, disappearing through the back doors as if the walls themselves had caved in on her. What was meant to be the most beautiful day of our lives had, in part, turned into a spectacle. A chaotic, uninvited show headlined by Candace and her unraveling ego. She had humiliated herself in front of everyone we knew and loved, not just by her outburst, but by the sheer desperation of it, the way she clung to the lie even after it crumbled. Security, who we had reluctantly hired at Jason's insistence, escorted her out of the venue while guests sat in stunned silence, some whispering, others simply shaking their heads. After she was gone, we somehow picked the pieces back up and finished our vows, but there was a heaviness in the air that didn't fully lift until we left the reception. And just when I thought it was over, the messages started. At first, they came from strange usernames, comments left under old posts, vague enough to ignore, but then they became personal. Accusations, threats, paragraphs laced with venom, telling me I had ruined her life, that I would regret everything, that I had stolen something that was meant to be hers. She never signed them, but I knew it was her. Every word was dripping with the same bitter entitlement I had come to recognize all too well. Jason and I are now married, truly happy, and more importantly, we've completely cut Candace out of our lives without hesitation or guilt. We don't talk about her, don't entertain updates about her, and we've built a quiet boundary that we both fiercely protect. Isaac filed for divorce shortly after the wedding disaster, and from what we've heard, her parents, once her unwavering supporters, have stopped taking her calls and won't let her step foot in their house. The fallout she created caught up to her in ways even I couldn't have imagined. And you know what? I don't regret a single thing. I don't regret standing my ground, drawing a line, or walking away from her chaos without a second thought. She chose this path herself. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel word was her own doing. All I did was finally stop standing in the way of the consequences she spent so long trying to outrun.